Greatest of mornings, everyone. This is Sunday Sessions with the Education Esquire. We are going to be getting started in 4 minutes exactly. And today's topic is regarding home ownership, the do's and don'ts of buying a property as well as selling a property. So I'm going to get us signed in on Facebook Live as well. And then we will get going now in 3 minutes. So greatest of mornings to each and every one of you. If you're tuning in, thanks so much for doing so. If you're watching this as the podcast and the playback, also thank you for watching that. So Sunday Sessions with the Education Esquire, the legal do's and don'ts of buying and selling a property. This podcast is public and free and available to any and all whom are interested in. So we will be going live in 3 minutes. We'll be getting started. We're going live presently, but we'll be getting started in now 2 minutes. So it is the countdown to our Sunday Sessions with the Education Esquire. Again, I'd like to thank each and every one of you who tune in, those of you who watch it back on the playback, and everyone who's interested in educating to elevate. We just finished Black History Month, but it doesn't stop. And the great W.E.B. Du Bois once said, educate to elevate. I'm going to grab something to drink throughout the workshop, and I'll be back. All right, my Gatorade Frost, which I'm going to put up high so I don't knock it over. All right, we're 60 seconds away from starting our Sunday Sessions with the Education Esquire. Today's workshop is regarding the legal do's and don'ts of buying and selling a property. We will be taking all questions as always, and hopefully any and all who are interested in learning about what's going on can do so. I am now changing the status from friends to public. So now the workshop should be available to all to see. So, all right, we are at 8:59. We'll be starting in exactly 1 minute, less than 1 minute, because it turned 8:59 a little while ago. I'm going to commence sharing my screen so that way we can just dive right in. Once again, my name is Mario A. Reed. I am the Education Esquire, and this is the Sunday Sessions with the Education Esquire, and we are going to be discussing the legal do's and don'ts associated with selling a property. All right, it's 9 a.m., so we are getting started. Thanks again to each and every one of you for tuning in and for watching it back at a later time and date. If you are watching on Zoom or on Facebook Live, we greatly appreciate it in either format, but we are going to be discussing today the legal do's and don'ts of buying and selling a property. So some of the things that we are going to be covering relate to what I like to call working on my ish phase. So this is the pre-submission of an offer, as well as getting things together. The purchase phase, I'm ready for my own phase. That's what it is. That's when you say, okay, I'm ready. I have identified a property and I'm interested in actually putting in an offer. I have a pre-approval letter from a lender and I'm ready to buy. Then we have the closing phase, and I like to refer to that as, I swear I already sent you that phase. And the reason why that is because you're going to frequently be sending a lot of the same documentation to the lender. So you would have sent it, let's say, a few different times, and then they're going to ask you to send it again. Then we have the post-purchase phase. This is, okay, we've got the house. Now who's ready for the cookout? But there are a lot of different things that you have to be aware of. This is what actually segues into the selling phase. So today's workshop is going to focus more on the legal do's and don'ts of buying a property. And then next week, we're going to cover the legal do's and don'ts when you sell a property. So be on the lookout for that one. And then we'll take all questions and get them answered per our usual, so feel free to ask any of those. Now, so we have the preparation for buying. When it comes time for you to purchase a property, there are a lot of things that a lot of people are unfamiliar with. And it's because even if you've purchased a property before, from a legal standpoint, there are things that I, as the legal professional, am focused on that you, as the buyer, aren't. And that's one of the reasons why it's so advantageous. Before you ever put in an offer, it's to your benefit to choose the attorney you wish to work with. This is the biggest legal do. Before you decide to purchase a property, the same way that you talk to your mortgage broker and figure out who you're going to be getting your loan through, you talk to your realtor and figure out who's going to be showing you houses. It's at that time and moment that you need to talk to your attorney and figure out which attorney you wish to work with. And the reason why is because once it comes time to submit an offer, that document is 13 pages of legal jargon. There are terms in there that even some of the most seasoned attorneys don't actually know what it is that they mean. And this is the reason why it's not to your benefit to sign that document before reviewing it with the legal professional who's going to be defending your rights. Our office frequently works with buyers who have signed a contract and initial on paragraph 36, which is the as-is provision. But they didn't understand that by initialing on the as-is provision, they were accepting that property as is. It's a very foreign concept to me, where even as a young boy, I understood that as is meant I'm taking this product as it currently is. But a lot of buyers don't understand that. They don't grasp the magnitude of what comes along with it. There's another provision, which is in the contract, that a lot of buyers are starting to initial, and they don't quite grasp and understand what comes along with it. And that's waiving their opportunity and the contingencies associated with a private home inspection. This is one of the worst possible things that any homeowner could do. In the state of Illinois and throughout the United States of America, property is purchased under the Latin perspective of caveat emptor. And what that means is buyer beware. Our system of property says it's the buyer's responsibility to do their due diligence. So the buyer has to make certain that the property that they're getting ready to spend all of those thousands of dollars, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, is to their liking and to their standard. And if the buyer doesn't do her or his due diligence, it's the buyer who then becomes responsible after they've purchased the home. You can't go back to the seller and say, hey, this roof leaks and there's a crack in the foundation and the windows are terrible, all this cold air is getting in, because the seller potentially gave you the opportunity to inspect the house, bring in a professional to inspect the house, and know what it was that you were signing up for. But if you failed to take advantage of those because either A, you didn't know you had that opportunity, or B, you were so thirsty and aggressive to get the home that you waived those opportunities, then now you have to accept what it is that you purchased. And this is why it's so imperative. You need to know who makes up your team before you start bidding on properties. You need to know which home inspector you intend on using. You need to know on who you intend on using for your homeowner's insurance. So you need to know your broker for your mortgage, your broker to show you the properties, your attorney to protect you and help you understand the contract, your private home inspector to come in and inspect the property and make sure that it's not a lemon. And then finally, your homeowner's insurance provider, who it is that's going to be protecting that home moving forward. Those are the dues, the legal dues that you need to know. Know who your full team is before you start bidding on properties. That is one of the most important things. Before you ever DocuSign that contract, go over it with your attorney. Review it with your professional so that that way you know what each one of those provisions are. Not all of those provisions apply to you. However, it's important that you understand the important ones. The other thing is that it's a great idea to always have your documents handy. When I say your documents, we're talking about the documents that the mortgage broker is going to be looking for, and also the documents that your real estate broker, as well as your attorney, may be looking for. It's important to discuss major issues right up front. If you walk into a house and you like it, but you see that it has a hole in the ceiling that is letting in debris and all other kinds of things, if you're going to say, I'm still going to buy this property, but I'd like to have that hole addressed, you got to tell your attorney right away, because your attorney is going to be the one who's going to go to the seller's attorney and say, hey, can we get this hole addressed? Whatever the major issues are, if there's a tenant in the property and you want to know what the status is with that tenant, if there is debris in the garage or in the backyard, whatever you notice when you walk, you have to communicate that to your advocate, because the attorney doesn't know what it is that is a major issue until you disclose it. And it's not enough to say, well, it'll come out in the attorney review. Attorney review is not some magical period where your attorney somehow learns how to read your mind. It is the opportunity for the attorney to advocate on your behalf, but you have to inform your attorney as to what it is that you want to be advocated for. Make sure that you're responding to the lender ASAP. The approval process takes weeks, sometimes months. That can oftentimes be prolonged because you're not getting back to the lender. If you want to buy that house and you want to get closed, you got to give the lender what the lender needs. And then be patient. Just because the contract date, closing date that was written on there says March 13th, doesn't mean you're going to close on March 13th. I would say less than 5% of all real estate transactions close at, on, or before the closing date listed on the contract. 95% of the deals close at least one day after. Most of them right now, still as a part of this pandemic, are closing sometimes more than a month beyond what the closing date is. So be patient. Don't go canceling leases and don't go scheduling movers based on the closing date. Be in communication with your lender. That is the biggest thing that you as a buyer can do. Your attorney doesn't know when you're going to close. Your realtor doesn't know when you're going to close. Your home inspector doesn't know, and your insurance agent. Only your mortgage broker knows, and not even your mortgage broker, because they're working with the team within their financial institution, with the underwriting department, with the closer. So the best line of communication is to your lender. Who you choose as a mortgage broker matters. If you have a terrible relationship with your mortgage broker, there's probably going to be a good chance you're going to have a terrible purchasing experience. I've had numerous buyers who got frustrated, pulled their hair out, and ended up not getting a home, ended up losing out on earnest money, all kinds of situations. So because of that, it is so imperative that you have a good relationship with your mortgage broker. You need to talk to them and feel like that's the person who has your best interest at heart. And then you also need to know what those dates are. The contract tells you certain important dates, two of which includes your closing date, as well as what's called your mortgage contingency date. Your mortgage contingency date is the date that you're supposed to be cleared to close through your lender. It very rarely works out where you're cleared to close 5 days in advance of the closing date. This is one of the things that most attorneys who represent buyers have to constantly do, is send over a mortgage contingency extension. For one client so we represent the seller. That's one of our primary concentrations. We've moved away from representing buyers in large part because it's a Herculean feat. It takes so much time, effort, and energy. And then, unfortunately, the market has set the price for that service ridiculously low. So because a lot of buyers aren't interested in paying $1,000 because they call other firms and the other firms say, well, we'll represent you for $500, not disclosing that it's not really going to be the firm, it's going to be the legal secretary who you're going to be checking in with and everything along those lines. But the mortgage contingency is the point when you are approved, fully approved, and you receive what's called a clear to close. If you have not received that at least 5 days in advance of that closing date, then there needs to be an extension so as to ensure that your earnest money is protected and the contract does not become breached. So knowing those dates is essential. When you go through the contract with your attorney, ideally your attorney is going to point out, hey, this contract says that you intend on closing March 15th. Right now, it's already March 1st. It's impossible for you to close in 14 days if you are getting approved for a mortgage. Now, if you're purchasing property in cash, or even, for instance, with the hard money loan, it is possible, but the likelihood is slim, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put a short closing date when we know the likelihood is very slim. So next up, you want to freeze those spending habits. And this is something that, again, your mortgage broker is going to be having these conversations with you. You're not going to want to go out and buy a new car. You're not going to want to go out and finance furniture. You're not going to want to do anything that shows you are a threat or a risk for giving a mortgage. So if those are things that you're interested in doing, do it well before you're looking to buy a home. I always recommend go 6 months so that way you clear that out of your credit report for the most part in terms of recent purchases. But the goal is to make sure that whatever it is that the broker looked at when you were pre-approved is consistent with what's going on right now in your current situation. So freeze those spending habits, and then don't go putting yourself in compromising positions where you now have to start explaining stuff. Don't go doing transfers, wire transfers to people. Keep it consistent with whatever it was that got you to that point of that pre-approval, because the more things you have to explain, the longer it's going to take. The longer it's going to take, the more everybody's going to get frustrated, and then tensions run high, and then the transaction can potentially fall apart. One thing that I didn't discuss is the earnest money. Talk about that earnest money with your broker as well as with your attorney. I recommend always going with the least amount possible, 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000. And I know that a lot of individuals are going to say, well, is the seller really going to accept my offer if I only put down 500? As a seller, someone who has sold, I think we've sold 8 properties, I never look at the earnest money because I don't care about the earnest money. The earnest money is irrelevant to me because I don't get it until I close. And whether it was 500 or 5,000, I'm still getting whatever I sold the house for. A lot of people say, well, that shows the seller that you're serious. The answer is no, it doesn't. The earnest money gets forfeited in fewer than 1% of all instances. It has to be an egregious breach that results in that earnest money being relinquished to the seller. The likelihood of that happening is 1 in, I'd say, probably close to 10,000. So because of that, whether it's $500 or it's $10,000, it doesn't make any difference to me as the seller, but it makes a world of difference to you as the buyer, because if that deal falls apart and now you're waiting for that $5,000 to be returned, that has a much greater impact on your decision to move forward and purchase a new or put an offer in on a different property, as opposed to if it's only 500. I see so many deals fall apart in the first few weeks, and then the buyer is waiting for the earnest money to be returned for weeks. And it's a case where there's nothing that I, as the buyer's attorney, can do. I can send 10,000 different emails to the seller's attorney saying, hey, please get us this earnest money. But until they relinquish it, unless you're going to spend $1,500 to go and file suit in the small claims division to actually get a court order that forces the seller to return it, then you have nothing. I have represented a seller who just refused to sign off on the release of earnest money. Now, thankfully, the amount I think was only $1,000, but the seller refused, and he was upset because the buyer couldn't get approved. So as his way of getting back at the buyer, he simply refused to sign the release of earnest money. Now, imagine how challenging of a situation it would be for that buyer if the buyer had put down $10,000. So that's the reason why you want to have that conversation. And please, please, please do not put down more earnest money than you can afford to have tied up for a month or even 2 months, because all it's going to do is complicate things should things go awry. All right, so I'm going to now pause because we're beyond 15 minutes, and this is typically when it is that we take the questions. So I'm going to pause here to see if we have any questions. Are there any questions? I'm heading over to the Facebook Live. Greatest of mornings to you ladies. Very appreciative of you signing in. Any questions about anything we've covered thus far? This morning's workshop are about the legal do's and don'ts of buying and selling a property. This week, we're focusing more on the buying part. Next week, we're going to cover the selling part. Are there any questions about anything that we've covered thus far? We've talked about kind of the overview, the earnest money, the home inspection, having the conversation with your attorney in advance of signing that contract, keeping your documents handy, discussing major issues. Your attorney does not know what's a major issue to you. You have to disclose that to your attorney. Responding to your lender ASAP. Be patient. It takes a while. Be prepared to walk away. I didn't touch on this one, but this one is a major legal do. A lot of times buyers will put in an offer and they get hooked on the idea of getting that property. And then the private home inspection will happen and it will disclose that this property is terrible. It has cracks in the foundation. It has water damage. It has holes in the roof. All of these things then come out, and the person is so hell-bent on getting the house that they say, well, can I just ask for a $5,000 credit? The answer is, yes, you can ask for it, but the likelihood of you getting it is slim. You need to go into it with the expectation that if this house has issues that are non-negotiables for you, you're going to be willing to walk away. And that takes you not falling in love with the property just because you like the finishes. You walk in and you like the granite countertops, or you love the floors, or you love the layout of the bedrooms. None of that matters if the property is going to fall apart and is going to be a money pit for you for the first 5 years of your home ownership. So do not fall in love with the property to the point where you're willing to overlook red flags. It's just like a relationship. So often we become enamored with somebody that we see the red flags, and then at which point we say, I can work through that. Just know that that's your property that you're going to be dealing with. So I have a question. Say you're purchasing an estate that doesn't advocate for an attorney. Is it still advantageous to the buyer and seller to do so? So the answer is it's going to depend. I'm of the belief that it's always advantageous to have someone who's a professional helping you. Just like you typically wouldn't look for a property on your own without a realtor, because of the fact that you're not going to know how to get the codes for properties. You're not going to be able to get in and out. You're not going to know how to prepare the contract. The same thing holds true legally. The purchase of a home is a legal transaction. It has to comply with the laws. It's not just the laws of home ownership, but it's the laws of that mortgage, the laws of the insurance contracts. All of those things have a legal aspect. So even if you're in a state such as Indiana, which doesn't recommend or doesn't require attorney representation, it's definitely to your advantage to still have an attorney, because a real estate attorney who practices in Indiana is going to know about things that are very nuanced, such as a municipal inspection. Here in Cook County, the city of Chicago Heights, the city of Harvey, the village of Dalton, they all have municipal inspections. South Holland doesn't have a municipal inspection. Homewood doesn't have a municipal inspection. So that's something that I, as a real estate attorney, will know, and it's going to change and alter the dynamic of the transaction. The same thing holds true in all 50 states. The attorneys who practice in that space are going to have advanced and heightened knowledge about real estate transactions that you won't, that the title company won't, that the realtor won't. So it's always to your benefit and advantage to always retain a legal expert, because they are going to bring value in the nuanced things that they know. One of the biggest things that we represent and help buyers to understand is the projection of property taxes. So when it comes to buying a property, you're going to receive a credit for the property taxes. However, there's a strong likelihood that within the next 3 years, those taxes are going to increase. Sometimes they're going to increase minimally. Sometimes they're going to increase drastically. Your attorney is the one who oftentimes will be able to say, hey, look, you're getting this property and the taxes are only $800 now, but come next year, because it's a reassessment year for your township, there's a strong likelihood that your taxes are going to jump by $4,000. That's going to cause your mortgage to increase by $400. Is that something you can afford? And if the answer is no, then you know that even though the taxes look good today, you can't go with that property because you won't be able to financially afford it. We received a call from Miss Owens. She purchased a property in Park Forest. The property, when she bought it, had taxes that were only $860. And the reason why is because it had been vacant and it was dilapidated. So the owner of the property appealed and got the value of the home reduced drastically. That's what resulted in the property taxes just being $837. The house only cost $90,000. So that was kind of a reasonable amount. Well, she buys the property. The following year, Park Forest was reassessed, and now the value of the home, according to the assessor, went from $50,000 all the way up to $180,000. Her mortgage increased by $1,200. She now began paying more in property taxes than the entirety of her mortgage previously. It more than doubled. And that was because her attorney, unfortunately, didn't look at the property and say, hey, this property was appealed. It's going to be reassessed. You're likely going to pay more. Just imagine in her instance, she had an attorney and that attorney didn't give her the information. If you don't have an attorney, you're guaranteed not to get that kind of information. And that's the reason why it's always to your benefit to have a legal professional. So great question. Okay, so I see no questions in the Facebook Live video. We're going to keep it moving. I see another one here in Zoom. Thank you for that confirmation. So this is what that contract looks like. And here in Cook County, we use the multi-board residential 7.0. This contract is the standard boilerplate. When I kept mentioning that it's 13 pages, this is the actual contract. It is essential that you go through this with the legal professional. There are certain provisions which are so invaluable to understand and know that you should go through it in advance. So let's say that you are putting in an offer for a property, and that offer, paragraph 4 is where you're going to talk about how much you're looking to pay for it. $209,500 is what this potential buyer was willing to offer for one of the properties that are Doma rehab at 2345 184th Place in Lansing, Illinois. So we rehab this property and we put it on the market and we get an offer of $209,500. Now, while a lot of people might say, excellent, that's what I'm looking for, you can't just stop there. You have to continue reading, because in this case, the buyer is asking for a credit at closing of $4,713. So that means that I'm now no longer getting $209,500 because I'm reducing the price by giving a credit at closing for $4,713. That lessens the amount that I'm receiving. So sometimes there might be an offer for $208,000 with no closing cost credit, which actually works out to be more financially lucrative than an offer of $209,500 with a closing cost credit of $4,713. Now, before I got into real estate, I would always hear closing cost credit. Make sure you get a closing cost credit. And I would always hear about closing costs. And I didn't quite understand what those were because, of course, when someone says closing costs, it doesn't actually do that great of a job of explaining the itemized and individualized expenses. Closing costs include, but are not limited to, things such as title commitment. When you purchase a home with the mortgage, the bank requires that that property have a title commitment or a title insurance policy. And what that tells the bank is that you can rest assured that the seller is in fact the seller of the property, and that property is going to be free and clear of any encumbrances, any liens, any property tax liability, anything that might compromise the lender's position as number one of getting paid should you stop paying the mortgage and they need to ask for a judge to foreclose on it. So that's one of the biggest expenses. That title policy can range anywhere from $1,750, $1,750 to sometimes as much as $3,000, depending upon how valuable of a property you're purchasing. Some of the other expenses are those loan charges. When you buy a house with a mortgage, you got to pay the loan officer. You got to pay the bank for all of the underwriting and things like that. Those costs can range anywhere from $3,000 to as much as $8,000, depending upon which lender you're using and depending upon how valuable of a property you're purchasing. So when you're asking the seller for a credit at closing, you're saying, hey, can you help me get to the closing table? Because if you don't get a credit from the seller, you're going to have to come out of your pocket for the title insurance expenses as well as the loan expenses. You're also going to have to come out of your pocket for expenses such as the appraisal, and that actually happens before you get to the closing table, as well as that private home inspection. Other costs that you'll have to come out of pocket for is oftentimes the lender wants you to prepay the homeowner's insurance. So that's another expense. All of those make up your closing cost, the loan charges, the title company charges. You have to pay for the deed to get recorded, which is $100. You have to pay for the mortgage to get recorded, which is $100. You have to pay for the overnighting of that, which is sometimes $40. You have to pay for the wiring fee. For the bank to wire the money to the title company, you have to pay for that fee, which is sometimes $50. You have to pay for the title commitment to be updated, which sometimes is $150. So all of these expenses begin to accumulate and rack up, and you have to bring that money to the closing table in addition to the money that you were expected to put down. Give me one moment, excuse me. So those are the closing costs. This is why you want to look over that contract with your attorney, because when I represent sellers, we go through the contract and we talk about pros and cons. In today's marketplace, it's a seller's market. So sellers are oftentimes receiving between 5 and 10 contracts. We go through those contracts and we compare and contrast. And then I say, based on all of these different offers, this one appears to be the strongest for these reasons. So I recommend you go that route. On this second page, up top, you're going to be looking at who's holding the earnest money. It might be the seller's brokerage, it might be the buyer's brokerage, it might be as otherwise agreed by the parties. The seller's brokerage means that the realtor who represents the seller is their brokerage is going to hold the earnest money. Buyer's brokerage says that the buyer is going to give it to the realtor company for them. And then as otherwise agreed by the parties, typically amounts to one of the attorneys. Our firm, we don't hold earnest money. Not interested in getting a trust account for that purpose. So we send it to the title company. In this case, we typically use Fidelity National Title Company. So if the box is checked as otherwise agreed by the parties, that means that money's going to Fidelity. And I prefer to do it that way because it needs to get to Fidelity anyway. So we might as well send it to them from the very beginning. Paragraph 5 has the closing date. The closing date never, ever, ever serves as the actual date, except for in very limited circumstances. If you're purchasing with cash, it always does. If you're purchasing it, and let's say that you had applied for a previous property, you got all the way through underwriting, and then something fell through, and now you're going with the new property, your closing date might be accurate. Another reason why your closing date might be accurate is because your realtor who fills out the contract puts down the 45 days that's reasonable. We see that happen, and oftentimes, if it's conventional financing, you'll be able to make that. But more often than not, the closing date is not accurate, so don't go basing your life off of that date. Paragraph 7 is the financing. This is where it talks about what type of financing. We always hear all of these different terms, FHA, VA, conventional, hard money. All of that's talking about your financing. FHA and VA means that it's insured by the government. VA is only available for veterans. FHA is an insured loan from the government, and that requires additional details to be uncovered as well as agreed to by both parties. Conventional is you went to a private bank and said, give me money so I can buy a house. And they said, no problem. You have the credit that we're looking for. You also have the assets that we're looking for. Your loan percentage is how much are you expected to pay versus how much is the bank asking to be put down. Then you want to talk about the years. Again, that doesn't really matter so much to the seller, but you're just putting them on notice as to it. Page 3 has the prorations. The prorations is one of the biggest and most important parts of the contract that 90% of all buyers are clueless about. This is why you need to talk about your contract with your attorney in advance, because prorations is going to have a lasting effect for years to come. Here in Cook County, we pay our taxes 1 year in arrears. Because of that, we don't know what your taxes are going to be. If you buy a house in 2022, come August, you're going to be paying the taxes for 2021. You didn't own the house in 2021. The really crappy part is that we don't know what the taxes are going to be come August for taxes that you weren't the owner for and responsible for. If the property was in a reassessment cycle, there is the possibility that the taxes could go from previous year of being, for instance, $5,000, and then come this August, you could get a bill that says that the taxes are now $8,000. If you only got credit for $5,000, guess who has to make up that $3,000 difference? Even though you had nothing to do with those taxes from 2021. That's what proration is all about. It is saying, hey, because we don't know what the taxes were from last year, because we haven't gotten that tax bill yet, instead of just asking for 100% of last year's bill, I'm going to ask for 110% or 115% or 120%. And the reason why is because there's a strong likelihood and possibility that those taxes are going to increase. And if they do, I don't want to be responsible for your taxes, seller, simply because Cook County can't calculate the taxes in a timely and reasonable manner. And that's the job of your attorney, to make sure that you're aware of and that you are protected as best as possible. Page 4 has that attorney review language. The attorney review period is the most disputed portion of the contract, and that's because ultimately everyone can read this contract differently. Some people say that within 5 business days, the attorney review letter has to be sent. I don't believe that, because I've seen the language on numerous instances where it says, if after the expiration of 10 business days after date of acceptance, written agreement has not been reached by the parties with respect to resolution of all proposed modifications, either party may terminate this contract by serving notice whereupon this contract shall be immediately deemed terminated. Because the language is so contested and so disputed, it's to your benefit to just move quickly. Before you put in an offer, call your private home inspector, the one that you want to work with, and say, hey, private home inspector, I'm thinking about putting in an offer on this property at 6011 James Street, which this is a real life scenario. I'm considering putting in an offer on I've already put in an offer on 6011 James Street. It's been accepted, but not signed. So I need to call Excellence Home Inspection. Shout out to Sean Bacon, one of the greatest home inspectors in the game, and say, hey, Sean, I'm interested in buying this property in Tinley Park. What kind of availability does Excellence Home Inspection have for inspecting this property within the next 3 days? And if Sean says, nope, right now we're really backed up, if it's possible, you then want to cater your offer. Now, sometimes if you wait on an offer in a seller's market, you're going to miss out and it's not to your benefit. So you just got to go ahead and bite the bullet and accept that, hey, we're going to have to maybe ask for an extension. And that's another common thing that happens in most real estate transactions. But you need to plan accordingly. You need to let your employer know, hey, I'm going to need a day off in the coming 5 days because you need to be present at that private home inspection, because there are things that the home inspector is going to be checking that you had no clue need to be checked. They're going to be doing thermal scans to make sure that the water is running the way that it's properly supposed to. They're going to be inspecting the crawl space, inspecting the attic, going in places that you won't go. So it's good for you to be there so that you can ask questions and you can get details about things that you otherwise wouldn't. All right, so I'm going to pause here to see. Whoa, time is flying. Guess we're having a whole bunch of fun today. So any questions? Any questions? I'm pausing here to see if we have any questions. I'm going to open up the window. Let me mute it so that way I can see if there are any questions that have been typed. And thank you all for indicating that it's good information. That's the goal, is to make sure that the information being provided is helpful. Henceforth, also why I want to make sure that if there are any questions, I want to get those answered as opposed to just talking about things that I kind of think are important. So any questions, feel free to post them. It's looking like we are good. Okay, so I don't see any questions. All right, so I'm heading back to the workshop. All right, so we talked about the prorations, we talked about the attorney review. Now we're going to talk about condos. Condos are terrible. Now, of course, that's a personal opinion, but if you are thinking about a condo, it is so essential that you talk to your attorney in advance. When it comes to condos and homeowners associations, so any type of association, there are so many rules that you are going to have to follow. Sometimes those rules will be things that don't really bother you. Sometimes those rules are going to be things that you are going to be furious about. And if you agree to those rules by purchasing a property, and that's part of the condo, you have to agree to all of their rules. I worked with one young lady who was purchasing a home. She purchased a home in a homeowners association, and she was unaware that she could not fence in her backyard. Well, she has a large dog, and that dog keeps getting out and running all throughout the community. The homeowners association has contacted her and basically penalized her because the dog continues to roam the community. But the reason why the dog continues to roam the community is because the association won't let her fence her own yard. That's just one of 1,000 examples that I can bring up about associations, whether it's a homeowners association or it's a condo association. Some condo associations will prevent you and prohibit you from renting your own property. Same for some homeowners association. You agreed to those terms when you decided to purchase. We've known clients who couldn't sell their condo because the condo association wasn't keeping the proper records, and the lender for a potential buyer would not allow for that buyer to close on that property and get the mortgage financing because the association is not managing their affairs in accordance with the Condo Association Act, as well as just general good accounting principles. Those are the types of things that come with condos. Once you've signed on the dotted line, there's no going back. The assessments, if they decide that they want to put a new roof on that condo building, with your input or not, you are signing up for that. And then they will have a special assessment. If they've said, you know what, we're going to appeal our taxes every year and we're going to have the members pay for it, whether they go out and hire the most expensive attorney or the least expensive, you get what comes along with that. You get all kinds of terms and conditions that you probably haven't even looked at, and it's imperative that you do so in advance. One of the #1 things that a lot of sellers that we represent, they always ask about is they say, why am I paying $3,000 in title company fees? Like, I didn't agree to that. And the answer is, yes, you did agree to it. You just didn't know you agreed to it when you initialed off on the contract. Paragraph 18 of the standard multi-board residential 7.0 contract says that at seller's expense, the seller will deliver or cause to be delivered to buyer or buyer's attorney within customary time limitations and sufficiently in advance of closing as evidence of title in seller or grantor a title commitment for an American Land Title Association, which is ALTA, title insurance policy in the amount of the purchase price with extended coverage by a title company licensed to operate in the state of Illinois, issued on or subsequent to date of acceptance, subject only to items listed in paragraph 16, and shall cause a title policy to be issued with an effective date as of closing. That's the commitment and information that the seller is agreeing to. The buyer oftentimes doesn't even know that they're getting that deal. But as a seller, you definitely want to know. We're representing a seller right now where he wants to walk away with $125,000 for the sale of a property in Riverdale. However, I explained to him that if this contract is going to be entered into, you're not going to walk away with anywhere close to $125,000 because you have to give credit, or the contract says you have to give credit for property taxes. The contract says that you have to provide a title commitment. The contract says that you have to provide a plat of survey. The contract says that you have to be responsible for the municipal ordinance, transfer taxes, and governmental compliance. All of these expenses are coming out of the seller proceeds. So if you wish to sell or if you wish to walk away with $125,000, realistically, you have to sell that property for a purchase price of about $134,000, because that's how much in expenses are going to be deducted from a seller's proceeds. So being aware of this in advance is so essential. For all of those people who are looking to buy properties and flip them, most of them are unaware of this. And they're like, oh, if I put in 150 and I sell it for 200, I'm going to make 50. It doesn't work anywhere close to that. One, because of the fact that you didn't even factor in your carrying cost. If you're paying for homeowners insurance, you got to factor that in. That's an expense that you're paying. Your utilities, you're paying those. Your taxes, you're going to pay those. You're paying for all those other expenses. But then when it comes time to sell, oftentimes you got to get a new plat of survey because it has to be within the last 6 months. Oftentimes you have to get that title commitment. So even if you get it and you invested what you thought was 150, and then you go to sell for 200, there are still close to $10,000 worth of expenses, which have to be accounted for, that is taking away from your profit. That's the reason why it's so essential. You know what's in the contract, because that's what it is that you're signing up for. The other thing is that your attorney will be able to tell you what type of transfer taxes you have. If you sell a property in South Holland, there are no transfer taxes. You just have to pay the final water bill, which is pretty much standard for all municipalities in Cook County. If you sell that same property 1 mile away in Dalton or 1 mile away in Calumet City, you now will have to pay transfer taxes. Dalton charges $5 for every $1,000. So if you sell a $100,000 property for $100,000, you're paying $500 to Dalton for nothing. They do absolutely nothing except for make your life miserable. They charge you for a home inspection. They charge you $60 for the transfer stamp, and then it's another $500. Well, if you sell it for $200,000, now you're paying $1,000 to Dalton, and that's just money that, again, you got no value for. They're not doing it. They're not helping you sell that house. They're not helping you find a buyer. They are just stealing money from you because you decided to purchase in Dalton. That's the type of thing which, and again, it might only be $1,000, but imagine saving $1,000 because you decided to purchase in South Holland instead of Dalton. And all you had to do was talk to your attorney in advance. Calumet City, same way. They're charging for a village, a city inspection. They're then charging you the transfer taxes, and it's for no valid reason. They're not bringing any value whatsoever to the table. They're just taking advantage of the fact that they can tax on a transfer, and it's a way for them to get money. It is a revenue generating tool that some municipalities use, some don't. Homewood doesn't charge a transfer tax. Lansing doesn't charge a transfer tax. South Holland doesn't charge a transfer tax. I don't believe Thornton does, but I've probably only closed on one, and I can't even remember that. Those are things that your attorney is going to know about where you might not. And having an awareness is essential, because if you paid it on the front end, you're going to pay it on the back end. So potentially in Calumet City, you're going to pay $4 for every thousand when you buy the property, and then $4 for every thousand when you sell the property. So now you spend $8 for every thousand, and you didn't get any value in exchange for it. So that's what it is that goes on with transfer taxes. That Platter survey, paragraph 19, says that the seller is supposed to be providing that. Now, really quickly, I want to go to some of the big portions that are at the back of the contract. Paragraph 32 talks about the home warranty. Sometimes a buyer will ask for a home warranty and then they'll put down a cost. I don't know why sellers are so annoyed by this, but I continue to see it where sellers say, well, why do I want to pay for a home warranty? And I'll say, they're asking for something that costs $600. Like, what are you mad about? But I say that to put buyers on notice that sellers are oftentimes turned off by that. So because of that, it may be to your advantage to just spend the $600 yourself and buy the home warranty, and then offer $600 less for the purchase of the property, because it's all mental. Paragraph 34 is the wood destroying infestation, which is the termite inspection. Most people fail to initial this, but sometimes the lender will require it and sometimes the lender won't. You as the buyer, all you have to do is just tell your realtor, hey, I want to initial paragraph 34. Now, it's not the end of the world if you don't, because that paragraph amounts to usually $100 to $150. A termite inspection is very minimal cost, but again, if it's something that you want, you have to make it a point to initial it and inform your realtor that you want it to be initial. This is part of what happens when you talk about the contract with your attorney. I ask every buyer who comes to us in advance before signing the contract, hey, would you want a termite inspection done? And then they say, yeah. And then at which point they initial off on it, and then the seller covers it. It's just that easy. It's all about the knowledge. Paragraph 36 is the most important paragraph of the contract. More important than the sales price, more important than the closing date, more important than the tax prorations, more important than even your name. If you initial as is, expect that property to be exactly as you looked at it. Don't expect for the furniture to be moved. Don't expect for the garbage to be out. Don't expect for anything. If the seller decides to do so, then that's a bonus. If you want something to be removed, you need to have your attorney ask the seller's attorney to guarantee that it's going to be in broom swept condition. Excuse me. As is means as is. I wish that I could go to every buyer who is thinking about buying a property and say, do you know what as means? Do you know what is means? Do you know what they mean together? Okay, that's what you can expect for this property. We get so many buyers and sellers we get a lot of sellers who agree to as is, and then they have to deal with the buyer who says, oh, well, this property has a bad roof, or, oh, this property has a crack in the foundation. Oh, this property has a lot of junk in it. And then the seller's saying, well, yeah, that's why I sold it as is. Why are they now acting brand new when I told them you're getting the property as it is? The reason why is because a lot of times it's not clear to all parties what that as is means. And that's why I, again, recommend talk to your attorney in advance. One of the things that I communicate to the seller is, hey, make sure your realtor makes it painfully clear that this property is being sold as is and will not be cleaned out, will not have any village inspections taken care of, or any items from the village inspection taken care of. Make it painfully clear that the buyer is going to be responsible for everything. And that's the definition of as is that's being presented. So that way, the parties can be on the same understanding and wavelength before you go through that process. The real estate purchasing and selling process could be very trying. It can be stressful. It can be very mentally draining. The more that everybody's 100% transparent and clear on what it is that they're signing up for, the less stress that comes along with it. So please, if you are going to sign an initial paragraph 36, don't go getting upset. We recently had a longtime client who buys properties and sells properties as an investor. And he/she was looking at a property in Homewood. Beautiful property. I know it well because it was right down the street from one of the properties that our Doma rehab. This buyer put in an offer of $250,000. The list price was only $220,000. That's the kind of seller's market that we're talking about right now, where people are having to bid $30,000 over the actual purchase price. Well, this buyer put in an offer of $250,000, put down earnest money of $5,000, and then drug his/her feet on having that private home inspection done. Ended up getting it done 6 days later. The private home inspection came back and showed that this property is a wreck and that there's going to be approximately $100,000 worth of repairs that are going to need to be made over the course of time. Well, now that buyer comes to us and says, hey, can you ask for a credit of $25,000 because there's $100,000 worth of damage? And I say, no, I can't ask for that because you said you were taking that property in the crappy condition that it's in, and you had every opportunity to walk it as many times as possible before you submitted an offer. Well, thankfully, the sellers were respectable and kind enough to say, okay, we get it. Your buyer is somebody who couldn't quite grasp the concept of as is, and we are going to relinquish that earnest money. But that seller could have said, no, you wasted our time for 14 days and then decided that you didn't want the property in the as is condition because it's older and it has these opportunities. Well, now we're not going to just kindly and quickly release this earnest money. Now, of course, we would fight back and forth and eventually we would recover it, but it doesn't need to be that way as long as you go into the transaction being honest and transparent that either, yes, I am taking it in as is, or no, I'm not. If the answer is I don't want to take it as is, don't initial the paragraph. Don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to your attorney. Don't do that to the seller. Be honest and be transparent. Yes, you might lose the property, but it may be the very best thing that could have ever happened to you. Okay, so then on that last page of the contract, it's asking for all of the information. It's to your, please make sure to put all of your information. A lot of buyers and sellers will say, hey, well, why do I got to put my phone number? When I represent a buyer, which again is few and far between because of the fact that it takes so much effort and energy that we just don't have right now, I oftentimes will have to go to the contract to find the buyer's phone number. If the phone number isn't on there, I might have to rely on email. And if you know that you're the type of buyer that doesn't respond to emails, then now I can't get in touch with you. I've had it out with buyers because they say, how come you didn't call me? And then I'll say, it's because I don't have your phone number. Your phone number is not on the contract. And there are a lot of people who don't include their phone number with their emails. So if I don't have your phone number, how can I call you? And a lot of people will say, well, how come you didn't just ask me for it? And then I'll say, I did ask you for it. I asked you to put it on the contract because the contract says it. Put all of the information on there. Tell your realtor, hey, I want for all of my information to be on here because throughout the transaction, people are going to need to get in touch with you. The title company, for instance, when we represent a seller and we're going to hold earnest money, the title company is going to hold the earnest money. They have to send the earnest money instructions to the buyer, and they use the buyer's phone number and email address. If it's not on the contract, now it's going to take 3-4 days of back and forth emails in order to get information that should have just been put on the contract. It's also important to put the attorney information. We get so many contracts where there is no information for the buyer's attorney or even the seller's attorney. And now, again, the lender can't move through the process simply because Basic information wasn't included on the contract. If you are buying a home, do not sign that offer without all of your information, all of your attorney's information, and all of your lender's information included on the contract. If you're a seller, do not sign that contract without saying, hey, I don't see the buyer's contact info. It should be on there. I don't see the buyer's attorney's info on there. It should be on there. We get to determine how the transaction proceeds. The legal component is so essential because you can't get to that conclusion usually in an efficient manner without it being done properly. All right, so I'm going to take a pause and see if we have any questions. Any questions? And I'm going to mute so that we don't get it. Any questions whatsoever? All right, so I'm still just seeing all of those details there. Okay, thank you everybody for those kind words once again. And now I am going back to the presentation. Let's get out of here. So let me go back. All right, so in returning to the presentation, where is my share? There we go. All right, so make sure that there's as much information on the contract as possible. Like we talked about, the earnest money, do the lowest amount possible. If you put down $5,000 and the deal falls apart, now you're waiting for $5,000 to come back. Let's say that you found a property that you wanted to now bid on. You're not going to have that $5,000 to put up as earnest money. That's why it's to your advantage. Do 500, do 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 maximum. Once you start going above that, now, if things don't work out, you have all that money tied up, and sometimes it might take weeks or months to get back. If it took 3 months to get back 1,000, it's probably not going to be as detrimental to your looking at other properties as if though it was $5,000. The earnest money just goes to the seller once the deal closed. In less than 1% of all cases is the earnest money ever released. I've probably represented over probably 300 buyers and sellers, and I can only think of 2 instances when the earnest money was actually forfeited to the seller. And in the second instance, technically it wasn't. The seller, like I said, is just being a jerk and not willing to sign off on the release. And now the buyer has to take legal action, actually go and file a lawsuit in order to recover. So basically, they've just walked away from it because they don't want to spend $1,500 to recoup $1,000 and go through all the hassle. So 2 instances out of probably 300. So we're talking less than 1%. It happens. Earnest money is basically just holding the property and saying, I want to buy it, and I promise, and here's some money that's going to go up. But the likelihood of the seller ever getting it is slim to none. When it comes to that earnest money, it is to your advantage and recommended that you send it with your tracking, whether it be overnight, whether it be just traditional tracking. The contract often says that it has to be within 2 days. So when I purchased the property in Lansing, put down $5,000. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, oh, you just talked about not putting down a lot of earnest money. Well, when I purchased the property, it was an REO. And as an REO, the bank gets to set the terms of everything, including the earnest money. So they indicated that the earnest money had to be a certain percentage of what the purchase price was. And because I was buying it from the bank, I didn't have a choice. That's very different than when you buy it from a private party. So I don't want everyone saying, oh, you just spent the last 20 minutes talking about put down the lowest amount possible. And now you show us an example where you personally put down $5,250. This was a very unique set of circumstances, and I didn't have a choice. And that's going to be the case sometimes. But this is why it's good. Talk to your attorney, figure out what the choices are and what details. Make sure that you're sending it with tracking, because you don't want $5,000 just floating around there and we don't know what happened to it. Get the tracking. We talked about the private home inspection. Strive to have it performed within 3 days of the offer. How you know that that's going to happen is that you will have talked to your private home inspector. Like I mentioned, Sean Bacon, Excellence Home Inspection. Call up Sean, call up the company. I won't say call up Sean because Sean's out working. So call up the company, talk to the office staff and say, hey, we're interested in buying this home in South Holland, and we wanted to know what's the availability like for a private home inspector within the next 3 days. If they say, oh, we're swamped, okay, you might want to consider saving your offer until the latest possible point. Now, because we're in a seller's market, don't sit too long because other people are looking, but have that conversation so that way you're not going into it blind. Your private home inspection becomes the guide in which you can use to better understand the many problems and issues which exist within the home. The more time to review, the better. Most home inspectors are going to turn that report around within usually 24 hours. Those reports are oftentimes 100+ pages. They are beautifully done reports that show color photos of everything that was happening with that property. It's going to talk about some of the municipal requirements. It's going to talk about the age of furnaces, of water heaters, of air conditioner condensers. All of that information is essential and vital, not even as it just relates to the purchasing process, but long-term. In our private home inspection report, it indicated that the plumbing was old. It was from 1954 or 59, whenever the property was built. It indicated that within the next 5 years, we were going to need to replace that plumbing. In year 5 exactly, the plumbing collapsed, and thankfully, the people who are in the property are contractors, so they were able to correct it themselves. But that was an example of how the private home inspection said this plumbing is aged and it's going to need to be addressed within 5 years. And sure enough, almost 5 years to the day, the plumbing collapsed and it needed to be addressed. Had we have looked at that private home inspection with a close enough and vigilant eye, we could have been saving each and every year for the anticipation of what was inevitable. So instead of then having to come out of pocket of $5,000 to replace the plumbing all at one time, we could have saved $1,000 a year. And then by year 5, when that issue arrives, we say, here you go. We have our rainy day fund, which was for this issue we knew was going to happen. And now it doesn't upset our finances in an unexpected manner. That's the importance and value of that private home inspection report. The professional inspections are covered by paragraph 12. We get a lot of buyers who will say, well, oh, I don't like the fact that this carpet is here. Can we get a credit for that? Or I don't like the fact that the walls are this color. Can we get a credit for that? The answer is no. The contract tells us what is covered as a part of the professional inspections. And it's paragraph 12, paragraph 12, section A, that says the request for repairs shall cover only the major components of the real estate, limited to central heating and cooling systems, plumbing and well systems, electrical system, roof, walls, windows, doors, ceilings, floors, appliances, and foundation. A major component shall be deemed to be in operating condition and therefore not defective within the meaning of this paragraph. That is the #1 misconceptions that buyers have. They'll say, well, oh, the furnace is old. Can we get a $600 credit for that? No, just because it's old doesn't mean that it's not working. If it's working, it's working, whether it's going to last for another year or whether it's going to last for another 10 years. If you don't want to purchase a property that has an old water heater, then you need to look at a home that doesn't have an old water heater. Don't go seek to buy a house that you know has an old water heater because you look at it and it looks old as dirt, and then say, well, I'm going to get a credit for that. You signed up for that old water heater. You signed up for that old air conditioner condenser. You're buying the property in the state in which it's in if there's not a defect with it. Even if you don't agree to as is, if the items are working, you're still getting those items in the state that they're in, whether they're brand new or whether they're 50 years old. You're buying it. As long as it's working, it's not defective. Please stop thinking that because you don't like the way something looks, you don't like the fact that it's old, you don't like the fact that it's a minor repair, that you can somehow qualify for credits, because that's not how the contract is written. So it's important that you either understand the contract or you accept what the contract says. But once you initial and sign, for better or worse, you're accepting what the contract says. This is why it's so essential to have the conversation with your attorney, because your attorney is going to know what the contract says, hopefully, and is going to help you to better understand it. So that way, if you know that this house has old water heater, old air conditioner condenser, old furnace, don't offer $10,000 above list price, because you have to realize that even if that's what it takes to get this property, now you're getting the fact that you're going to have to replace these items within probably 3 or 4 years. And that's so you're actually paying more than $10,000 over list price, because you got to come out of another $7,000 within the next 3 years for items that you knew were in the property. Be smart, be aware, be informed, be a quality and informed consumer. All it takes is having an understanding of what you're signing up for. Don't just go pencil whipping a 13-page legal document for an asset that you're going to spend $250,000 for. It's too much money. It's too big of an important thing in your life. Be an informed consumer. Look at the inspection report. Remember when I was telling you about had I have looked at the inspection report for our property? I'll be honest with you. I represented myself, which was the stupidest thing I ever could have done. Not the stupidest, one of the stupidest. And then it was my first transaction. So I didn't even know that this private home inspection report had all this valuable information in it. As it turned out, it ended up being something that I needed to be aware of. You see here where it says sewage entering the building. So the private home inspector uncovered that there was sewage that was entering the building, and it was happening with the crawl space. It was happening, and it needed further evaluation. I didn't look at this private home inspection report. After we closed on the property, we got in it, it always smelled bad. Whenever we would wash our clothes. Well, it was because of this reason. The waste plumbing, the drain piping was done incorrectly. Had I have looked at the private home inspection report and said, hey, seller, you now need to address this because of the fact that this is something that's an issue, we would have avoided that. As it turns out, when we went to close, the seller gave me an entire breakdown as to how they kind of remedied it. You were supposed to open up some lid or some type of sump pump action whenever it was that you were, whenever it rained so much. He gave me, and I said, okay, whatever, I'm just trying to get to the house. That's what happens. You start overlooking red flags because you're just trying to get to the house. Don't do that. You're going to regret it. I know, because it happened to me. This is what a potential attorney review letter looks like. This is one that was done by our associate attorney, Brittany Shatani, who does a fantastic job. Whenever it is that there are buyers, if you're a buyer who's looking to purchase a property and you need an attorney, I highly recommend attorney Brittany Shatani with the law offices of Mario A. Reed. She is as thorough as it gets and now has all kinds of experience and familiarity with it. She works quickly and she's going to be an advocate for you. I also want to tell you that she is expensive in comparison to other law firms. And the reason why is because she's doing the work, not a legal secretary, not an admin. And that's no knock on any legal secretary or paralegal, because once they have experience, they're going to be good as well. But the difference is that attorney Shatani is an attorney. And because of that, she has certain expertise as well as credentials that you're not going to get with the legal secretary or even with the paralegal. So if you need an attorney to represent you as a buyer, she is fantastic, but understand that a lot goes into it. So that's why when that price tag is there, it's because you're getting it in return. So this notice is supposed to be sent no later than 10 days. That's how I read this. But again, some sellers say, no, it's supposed to be 5 days. Attorney Shatani is going to send over an engagement one to get the party started and then send over the final one once it is that the inspection has been done. She's also going to talk through that inspection with you to say, hey, these are some items that I noticed. Do you want for me to ask for them, or are you good and you're comfortable without me asking for them? That's what that process should look like. When it comes to preparing your documents, I recommend create a folder which is exclusively for the purchasing of the property. That way, you can have it ready and handy. I also recommend upload it to the cloud. Sometimes your lender's going to reach out while you're at work, and then you'll say, oh, I don't have those documents here. They're at the house. If you upload everything to the cloud, if that mortgage broker calls you while you're at work, you can say, no problem. Let me sign in real quick to my email and then send everything over to you. Keep your documents in a place where they're accessible and they're handy, so that way you can get to them as quickly as possible, so that way you can move through the process as quickly as possible. The average home inspection cost ranges from $315 all the way up to as much as $800. The larger the house, the more it's going to cost for your private home inspection. It is to your advantage to have a private home inspection. The average real estate attorney fee, this says $150. I don't know where it is that goes. Where it says the $500 to $750 range, that's more reasonable. Our firm is at $1,000. This is one of the only costs that I will tell people about, because we get so many people who reach out and say, hey, can you represent me as a buyer? And one, I've mentioned that we don't have the time and availability like we used to, but our fee is higher than any other attorney that I know of. And that's because we do things differently than any other attorney. So I like for people to know right up front, we're charging $1,000. So if you are interested, be aware that it's going to be this higher cost. But if that's something that scares you away, we understand, and best of luck. But right now, we are scaling that back, and it's in large part because when we take on a buyer, we approach it differently. So we can't have 10 and 15 buyers at a time, because we can't actually address them in the way that we'd like to. All right, question is, should it be understood to have your agent draft your offer and have your attorney review it before it's submitted? So the answer is yes. That is absolutely what should happen. Is this the time you can add your contingencies regarding addressing issues with the inspection? The answer is yes. If you have your agent draft your offer and then have your attorney review it, your attorney can add in certain things. And I'm glad you asked that question, because I forgot to mention, you are in the most powerful position as the buyer before the contract has been accepted by the seller. Once the seller accepts your offer, all of your leverage goes away, because now you're bound to what it is that you said. So it's best to ask for the moon right up front, because that way, if you get it, then now the seller's bound to it. But what so oftentimes happens is that buyers will say, well, I don't want to lose this property, so I'm not going to be greedy. That's the worst thing that you could possibly do, because if you don't ask for all of that stuff right up front, then the seller now has no incentive to give you any of those other items. So it's so essential to ask for the moon right up front, and then at which point you can always walk it back throughout the negotiations. So great question. And yes, it is best to approach it where you're asking for as much as possible right up front, and then you walk it back later on. Great question. Thank you. All right, so I'm now coming back to see if we have any more questions. We are in the home stretch, and we are going to be wrapping it up soon. So if there are questions, please feel free to post them. It doesn't look like we have any, so I'm going back to the workshop. All right. One of the things that I mentioned that your attorney is ideally going to be doing is looking at the taxes. Understanding what your assessed value is essential. Doesn't matter how much you pay for the property, doesn't matter how much you think the property is worth. What matters is, what does the assessor think that that property is worth? Because that's going to determine the taxes now, and it's going to potentially determine the taxes later. Having an understanding of that assessed value and talking through that with your attorney is essential. You also need to look at the exemptions. If a property has 3 exemptions on it and you see the taxes are only $4,000, that's not what your taxes are going to be, unless you're a senior citizen who has a household income of less than $65,000. If that's not your situation, you need to understand that your taxes are going to increase drastically, sometimes possibly even double, sometimes quadruple, depending upon if it was a senior who had the senior freeze and how long they had the senior freeze. So look at the taxes. Buying a house is not just a singular transaction, which happens at one time. It's a transaction that has a 30-year or longer lasting effect. Understanding what happens in years 3 and 4 is just as important, if not more, than understanding how to get to the closing table. When you purchase a property, you're going to get a closing disclosure. That closing disclosure is going to have all of the details concerning your monthly payment. It's going to have your principal, interest, estimated escrow, whether or not there's mortgage insurance. It's also going to have what's called the cash to close, plus it's going to have what are your closing costs. Remember when I talked about those closing costs, the title company fees, as well as the loan fees? Here's an example. When we purchased the property at 2345 184th Place, we purchased it for just $88,000. This is a couple of years ago. A lot of people are saying 5.25, that rate is ridiculous. In 2018, that rate was great, but thankfully we're no longer in that predicament now. So those rates are even half as much. Well, on an $88,000 loan, the closing costs were $9,100. $9,100, more than 10%. So when that buyer is asking for a 3% credit towards closing costs, they're trying to offset those expenses. Those loan costs are, we've got the loan origination fee, $1,280, the extension fee, $228. Credit report, all of these title fees that are being paid to the title company, $3,400 that are coming from the bank, $4,900 coming from the title company, as well as all these other expenses. Those are those closing costs that you always hear about. You're going to get a settlement statement. The settlement statement is the singular most important record-keeping document. This is essentially the bill of sale that shows all of the expenses. It breaks down what all of those expenses were, what the credits were, what the debits were, what the buyer is getting, what the seller is getting. All of that information is outlined there, and that's the information that matters most to yourself. You should be aware of this. You should get this document about a day in advance. It's good to bring more money than what it is that says. Typically, your closing attorney is going to provide the amount that you're going to bring to the closing table, and that should typically be a little bit more than whatever the amount shows. Clear the entire day. Closings can sometimes take several hours, if not an entire day. Don't try and do it on your lunch, because it might end up taking 3 hours, and then at which point now you might get fired. Now you're in a terrible position. Do the walkthrough several days before. I recommend do it at least 1 day in advance, because if there's something that needs to be addressed, give yourself and the seller some time to do so. So I recommend, if you're closing on Friday, do the walkthrough Wednesday evening, so that way you can make sure that everything's moving in place. You can always come back and then do another walkthrough on Thursday evening or Friday morning to check and make sure that everything was brought up to speed like you wanted it, but give yourself and the seller some time. Critically read each and every document. Once you've signed it, you're on the hook. This is where having that attorney comes in to play, because they can help you not have to read every single sentence, but they can point out the important things that you should be on the lookout for. Know your documents. Know where your deed is. Know that you've gotten your plat of survey. Know where your title commitment is. Those documents matter. They're not just there for fluff. They're not just there because they have to be. They're there for your benefit. Know where they're located. Know what they mean. Know what the value of them is. Your plat of survey looks like this. It shows you your building line. It shows you where the property is located in relationship to the street, in relationship to other people's properties. Know where your plat of survey is. If you want to put in a fence, you need your plat of survey. If you want to do additional hardscape, you need your plat of survey. You get your deed when you first purchase the property. It does not come when you pay it off. It comes when you first get it. That deed should show the grantor and it should show the grantee. Your deed probably isn't going to look like this one, because unless you bought a property from a seller that we represented, your deed won't look like this. We make deeds look the way that, in our opinion, it should, which is all of the key information should be bold and should be available, but you should have your deed in your closing paperwork. Sometimes it's going to look like just a regular old crappy piece of paper, but that's probably your deed. If it says deed, that's your deed. Okay, so that's it. I'm going to see if we have any questions, because we are now 22 minutes beyond when we normally go to, but I want to answer any questions. So I'm going to stick around until 10:30, and I'm going to take any and all questions in which anybody may have. Any questions about anything that we've talked about? Like I mentioned, today's workshop is primarily focused towards the buyer side. We're going to be looking at the seller side come next week. So if you are interested in considering selling your property, please feel free to tune in next week, and we're going to go through the legal do's and don'ts as it relates to that. We touched on some of them, specifically as it relates to those, the title insurance and the platter survey, but there's a lot more that goes into it. So if there are any questions, I will take those now. And then if not, I'll stick around at 10:25, because I don't want everybody just looking at one another for 8 minutes if we don't have to. Any questions? Any questions whatsoever? And thank you to everyone for the kind words of saying it's good information, as that is the goal, to get it all and greatest the mornings all once again. Any questions whatsoever? If so, feel free to ask. If not, we are going to be. Okay. Any questions? Any questions? Please, please, please let us know. All right. Really quickly, right now, if you own a home in the southern suburbs, the Board of Review is open for property tax appeals. The Board of Review is the second agency that allows for property tax appeals. They are only going to be open through the 29th. So now it's a limited window. So if you own a home, it is advantageous, and thank you, Ms. Davis, for that kind word, to appeal your property taxes. Most of us who appeal through the assessor's office, you should have received your letter telling you whether or not it was granted or not. For Kenwood, mine was denied. For Lansing, thankfully, it was approved. You still get to appeal yet again. It's the second round. You can go through the Board of Review, cookcountyboardofreview.com, and you can appeal. If you're getting ready to purchase a property, it's to your advantage to appeal now before you close on the property. One of the other things to keep in mind is, as it relates to property, our property tax bill for the first installment was due March 1st. If you don't have a mortgage and you are responsible for your property taxes yourself, March 1st was the date. At the end of this month, the penalty is going to start being applied 1.5% each and every month after this month. So March 1st, taxes were due, get them paid if possible. Okay, I see no other questions. Let me just supersize it once more. So I'd like to thank each and every one of you for tuning in. I do hope that the information was beneficial. As always, the podcast will be available for 30 days. You can always go back and watch it for the next 30 days. After that, it expires. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a great weekend all, and take care. Share and